I had brought my daughter a little housewarming gift that afternoon. It was nothing extravagant. Just a small silver picture frame I'd found in a shop downtown, the kind with a simple border and enough room for a photograph of the people you love. Audrey had recently moved into her new house with her husband, Travis Hale, and I thought I'd surprise her. I was halfway up the front walk when I heard Travis shouting through the open kitchen window, "You're useless. Who do you think pays for this?" I stopped. My fingers tightened around the little box in my hand. I moved closer to the window and looked through the narrow gap in the curtain. Audrey was sitting on the kitchen floor. Her face was wet with tears. Travis stood over her, furious. "You can't even contribute to this house," he snapped. "The bills, the mortgage, everything falls on me." Audrey tried to answer. "I didn't mean." "You never mean anything." She lowered her head. I took one step toward the front door. Then Audrey looked up. Not at Travis. At the door. At me. Call. For 1 second, our eyes met through the glass. Her expression wasn't anger. It wasn't surprise. It was fear. And somehow, that stopped my hand from touching the doorbell. I stepped back. I walked quietly to my car, placed the little gift on the passenger seat, and sat there staring at the house. My hands were shaking. I reached for my phone and called Martin Shaw, the man who had handled my legal affairs for nearly 20 years. "Martin?" "Yes, Gideon?" "I need everything you can find on Travis Hale." There was a pause. "Everything?" I looked at my daughter's window. "Start with what he does for a living." I ended the call. I didn't know what I was about to uncover, but I knew one thing. That was the moment I stopped asking myself whether my daughter was happy, and started asking myself why she was afraid to tell me she wasn't. Before we continue, subscribe and join our growing family for emotional stories of family, betrayal, justice, and unforgettable life lessons. And tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. I love knowing where these stories reach. I thought the man inside that house was simply cruel. I didn't yet know my daughter was carrying a secret that made her believe she had no right to leave him. My name is Gideon Mercer. I'm 73 years old, and for most of my life, I was better at building businesses than talking about feelings. But there was one person who could always make me put the business aside. My daughter, Audrey. Her mother, Luna, was the love of my life. When Luna became ill, I spent every day beside her pretending I wasn't terrified of the day I'd have to live without her. One evening, when Audrey was asleep upstairs, Luna took my hand. "Promise me something, Gideon. Anything. When I'm gone, don't let Audrey spend her life believing she has to earn your love. Let her make her own mistakes. Let her choose her own life. Just make sure she always knows she has somewhere safe to come home to." I kept that promise. After Luna died, Audrey and I learned how to live in a house that suddenly felt too quiet. We cooked together, badly. We called each other every Sunday. When Audrey rented her first apartment, she called me before she even unpacked. "Don't send me money, Dad." I wasn't going to. "You were thinking about it." She knew me too well. I had built a successful company, but I never told Audrey how much it was worth. I wanted her achievements to belong to her, not to my name. Then she met Travis Hale. He was confident, polished, and ambitious. Over dinner, he told me, "I want to build something of my own. I don't want to live off anyone." I liked that answer. More importantly, Audrey looked happy. So when she married him, I stood beside her with a smile. I didn't know that smile would become harder to wear. After the wedding, Audrey's calls became shorter. She stopped dropping by on Sundays. Whenever I asked, she'd say, "We're just busy." Then one evening she looked at me and said quietly, "Dad, please don't worry about me." That sentence stayed with me. I thought my daughter was simply adjusting to married life. I didn't understand that she was already learning how to hide her unhappiness from the one person she trusted most. The first time I realized Audrey had changed. She apologized for something that wasn't even her fault. We were having lunch at her house. She reached for the salt. Travis immediately looked up. "You're putting too much on that." Audrey stopped. "Oh, sorry." I watched her put the salt down. It was such a small moment that I almost dismissed it. Then there was the thermostat. Travis complained that she had left it too warm. She apologized again. At dinner, he questioned the price of the groceries. Again, she apologized. I began noticing a pattern. Audrey used to challenge me over everything. Now she seemed to measure every word before speaking. One afternoon, I asked her to join me for lunch. She glanced at her phone. I should probably ask Travis. I frowned. Since when do you need permission to have lunch with your father? She forced a smile. I don't. He's just been stressed. That answer bothered me. Later, when Travis stepped outside, I asked her quietly, Audrey, are you happy? She smiled too quickly. Of course, Dad. Then Travis walked back inside. Her shoulders tightened. Her voice changed. I noticed. She knew I noticed. Neither of us said anything. A week later, I saw a letter arrive at the house. Audrey picked it up before I could see the envelope. She slipped it beneath a stack of magazines. Everything okay? I asked. Just old paperwork. Her fingers were trembling. I looked at her. Do you want to tell me about it? No. The answer came too quickly. Then, she softened. I'm sorry, Dad. I just don't want you involved. I let it go. That was difficult. Every instinct in me wanted to reach across the table and demand the truth. But Luna's final request came back to me. Let her choose her own life. So, I waited. I didn't know what that letter contained. I didn't know why Travis seemed to control every small decision. And I certainly didn't know why a piece of paper could frighten my daughter more than the man standing beside her. I had seen fear in my daughter's eyes before, but never when someone merely mentioned a piece of paper. A month later, I finally got Audrey alone. We were sitting in my kitchen when I asked her about the letter again. This time, she didn't pretend. I made a mistake before I met Travis. I waited. She stared into her coffee. I was trying to help someone. Who? She shook her head. It doesn't matter anymore. What kind of mistake? Her eyes filled with tears. I signed something. I leaned forward. What did you sign? I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. She told me the situation had gone badly. There had been money involved. Promises. Paperwork. Eventually, Audrey had spent years repairing the damage. But it's resolved, she whispered. Completely? Yes. Then why are you afraid? She looked toward the window. Because Travis found the documents. My stomach tightened. What documents? The old ones. She rubbed her hands together. Whenever I talk about leaving, he tells me he'll show people what I signed. Show them what? I don't know. Audrey. She finally looked at me. He says nobody will believe me. He says they'll think I'm irresponsible, that I lied, that I hid what happened. I felt anger rising in my chest. You made a mistake years ago. You fixed it. I know. Then what does he have over you? She lowered her voice. He knows I'm ashamed. That answer hurt more than anything else. Because I suddenly understood. Travis didn't need a legal chain. He had built an emotional one. He had taken something Audrey regretted and turned it into something she feared. That evening, I quietly asked Martin to find out whether the old matter had truly been resolved. The answer came 2 days later. It had. No outstanding debt. No active claim. No legal obligation. Nothing. Yet Travis still possessed copies of the old paperwork. And he was using them to keep my daughter afraid. I sat alone in my study that night, staring at Martin's report. My daughter believed her past had become a chain. I had spent my life building businesses, and I knew chains could be broken if you found where they were attached. Martin called me 3 days later. I've looked into Travis Hale. I was sitting at my desk when he said it. I expected bad news. I wasn't prepared for how ordinary the beginning sounded. His resume is impressive, Martin said, at least on paper. Strong positions, successful projects, senior responsibilities. Then Martin started removing the shine. One credential couldn't be verified. A former employer had settled a workplace complaint involving Travis. There were questionable expense reports, 2 unexplained resignations, and 3 former coworkers had described the same behavior. Travis took credit when things went well and found someone else to blame when they didn't. Is any of that enough to act? I asked. No, not by itself. Then Martin paused. But I found something else. He told me Travis worked for a company connected to one of my own business holdings. I said nothing. That connection was not publicly associated with me, Travis had no idea who actually controlled the company. I asked Martin to keep it that way. That evening, Audrey came to my house. She looked exhausted. "Dad, I can't just leave him." I put down my coffee. "Why?" She stared at the floor. "Because he knows what I did." There it was again. That old mistake. That old fear. I asked, "Audrey, if the paperwork is resolved, what are you afraid he'll do?" "He'll make everyone believe I'm a terrible person." I reached across the table. "You made a mistake." "I know." "You fixed it." "I know." "Then why are you still letting him punish you for it?" She didn't answer. Her silence told me everything. Travis wasn't keeping my daughter because he loved her. He was keeping her because Spear worked. And for the first time, I understood that rescuing Audrey wasn't going to mean simply getting her away from him. I had to help her believe she was allowed to leave. By then, I knew Travis was using my daughter's past against her. What I didn't know was that his own career had already begun leaving a trail. Martin brought in a forensic specialist named Nora Bell. She didn't care about Travis's resume. She cared about patterns. She compared his expense records with internal reports, reviewed complaints from former employees, and traced several decisions he'd made at work. Within a week, the pattern was unmistakable. Travis had pressured junior employees to alter numbers. He had submitted expenses that didn't match company records. He had taken credit for projects completed by people beneath him. But Nora found something more serious. "He's been pushing a financial arrangement involving a private associate," she told me. "Why?" "Because it benefits him." I leaned back. That was Travis. Not a man making one bad decision. A man who repeatedly tested how much he could take before someone stopped him. Then Nora found a complaint I'd never expected. A coworker had reported that Travis regularly discussed his wife's financial situation, her inheritance, her father's property, what Audrey might receive someday. I read that page twice. Suddenly, the questions he'd asked Audrey didn't seem harmless anymore. He wasn't merely controlling her spending. He was studying what she could eventually bring into his life. I wanted to confront him immediately. Instead, I called Audrey. "Don't tell Travis what we know." She went quiet. "Why?" "Because if he realizes we're watching him, he'll stop showing us who he is." She understood. For the first time, we were working together without Travis knowing. Audrey began saving messages. Dates. Threats. Financial demands. Anything that showed his pattern. I told her not to provoke him. Just document. Meanwhile, Martin and Nora kept digging. Every answer produced another question. Who was the private associate? Why was Travis interested in Audrey's inheritance? And why had he been so confident that nobody would ever examine his work? One evening, Martin called. We found another connection. To what? The company. I stared through my office window. Travis had no idea how close he'd come to someone who could actually examine everything he'd done. For the first time, I stopped trying to pull my daughter out of the trap. I started making sure the trap could never close around her again. I gave Martin one instruction. Preserve everything. Nothing dramatic. No confrontation. No threats. Every document was copied. Every message Audrey had saved was secured. Every workplace complaint was documented properly. And while we worked quietly, Travis became more confident. That was the strange part. The more evidence we gathered, the more powerful he seemed to believe himself. One evening, Audrey called me after Travis had been drinking. He told me something, she said. What? He said, your father can't save you from everything. I closed my eyes. He knows you're unhappy. He knows I'm thinking about leaving. Did he threaten you? She hesitated. Not directly. That was enough. I told Martin to accelerate the review. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened at Travis's company. He received an invitation to a private executive meeting. He assumed it was about his performance. According to Audrey, he came home almost excited. He thinks he's getting promoted, she told me. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, let him think that. Behind the scenes, senior executives were reviewing the evidence. Martin began receiving calls from people Travis had never met. A board member asked me whether the founder wanted the matter handled internally. I gave him one answer. Follow the evidence. There was something almost poetic about it. Travis had spent months believing an older father-in-law was too harmless to challenge him. He had no idea that people inside his own workplace were now examining the decisions he'd made. And I still hadn't told Audrey everything I knew. I wanted her freedom to come from truth, not from discovering that her father had simply used his influence to crush her husband. So I waited. I watched. And I let Travis keep believing he was winning. Because sometimes the most useful thing you can give a dishonest person is enough confidence to make one more mistake. Travis thought the meeting was going to change his career. He had no idea the man he believed was a powerless old father-in-law had already been waiting for him inside that building. Audrey finally told me everything. Years before Travis, she tried to help a close friend who was drowning in debt. She signed as a guarantor, believing she was giving someone a temporary lifeline. Instead, that person disappeared. Audrey inherited the consequences. She spent years paying what she owed, correcting the records, and resolving every legal obligation. There was nothing left, she whispered. I fixed it. I believed her. Then, Travis found the old paperwork. He told me nobody would believe I was innocent, Audrey said. He said one mistake proved what kind of person I really was. My chest tightened. He hadn't discovered a crime. He had discovered something my daughter was ashamed of. And he had turned that shame into a prison. Audrey wiped her eyes. I thought because I made one bad decision, I didn't deserve a better life. I reached across the table and took her hand. Your worst decision is not your identity. She looked at me. For the first time, I saw something stronger than fear in her eyes. I saw anger. Not the kind that destroys. The kind that finally tells you enough is enough. If this story is keeping you with me, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Because what happened next was the moment Travis finally discovered who he'd been dealing with. I finally understood what Travis had stolen from my daughter. It wasn't her money. It wasn't her marriage. He had stolen her belief that she was allowed to choose her own life. Travis walked into the executive conference room expecting a promotion. He was wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder. He even smiled at the receptionist. That smile disappeared when he entered the room. Martin was there. So was the company's general counsel. 3 board members sat along the far side of the table. Travis stopped. What's this? Nobody answered. Then the door behind him opened. I walked in. He stared at me. For a moment, I could almost see him trying to understand why Audrey's 73-year-old father was standing inside his company's executive boardroom. Gideon? I took the empty chair at the head of the table. Travis looked around. Why are you here? The board senior director stood. Mr. Hale, there's someone you should formally meet. He gestured toward me. Mr. Gideon Mercer, founder and chairman of Mercer Holdings. Travis went completely still. I watched the color leave his face. You, Jas. I said nothing. He looked at Martin, then at the board, then back at me. You own this company? I founded it. His confidence vanished. Martin opened the first folder. Inside were the workplace complaints, the expense reports, the altered figures, the internal communications. Then came the financial arrangement involving Travis's private associate. Travis shook his head. These are misunderstandings. The general counsel pushed another document forward. Then you'll have an opportunity to explain them. Travis looked at me. You did this because of Audrey. I met his eyes. No. He seemed confused. I continued. Your marriage is a private matter. Your misconduct here is not. That sentence silenced him. I hadn't brought him into that room to humiliate him. I hadn't even decided what punishment he deserved. The evidence would determine that. But Travis finally understood something he'd never considered. The man he'd dismissed as an old, powerless father-in-law had never needed to threaten him. He had simply needed to let the truth catch up. And now it had. Travis had spent months telling my daughter that I was powerless. That afternoon, he discovered exactly how dangerous a powerless man can become when he stops asking to be respected and simply starts protecting the truth. Travis came home furious. He slammed the front door so hard the picture frame shook. Audrey was standing in the kitchen. He pointed at her. This is your father's doing. She didn't answer. You think he's going to protect you forever? I Gracie 8. That's what 7 forever all. Still nothing. Travis pulled the old paperwork from his briefcase and threw it onto the table. You remember this? Audrey looked at the pages. For months, those documents had been enough to make her hands tremble. Not tonight. Travis stepped closer. Without me, you're nothing. Audrey slowly picked up the papers. I paid this debt years ago. His expression changed. What? I paid everything. I resolved everything. You knew that. I know what those documents say. No, she replied. You know what they made me afraid of. He tried to interrupt. She didn't let him. You took the worst mistake I ever made and used it to convince me I deserved everything you did to me. Travis stared at her. I gave you a home. You gave me a cage and called it a home. His face hardened. You'd have nothing without me. Audrey looked at him for several seconds. Then she reached for her wedding ring. She slowly removed it. The small sound it made against the wooden table seemed louder than his shouting. I'm not your prisoner anymore. Travis stared at the ring. For once, he had no answer. Audrey picked up the old documents, tore them in half, and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. I was ashamed of something I did years ago, she said. But I don't owe you the rest of my life because of it. She walked toward the door. Travis didn't follow. My daughter had finally stopped asking whether she was allowed to leave. But there was one thing I still needed her to understand about why I had stayed quiet. The next morning, Audrey came to my house. She looked tired, but different. Lighter. We sat on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee between us. After several minutes, she asked the question I'd expected. Why didn't you just destroy him when you found out? I looked toward the garden. Because I didn't want to spend my life fighting your battle for you. She frowned. I don't understand. I could have used my position to crush him the moment I discovered what he was doing, but then you might have spent the rest of your life wondering whether you left because your father forced the choice. She lowered her eyes. So you waited. I protected you while you found your own strength. She was quiet. Then, she whispered, You saved me. I shook my head. No, you saved yourself. Travis eventually lost his position because of documented misconduct. The company followed its legal process, and his professional reputation suffered because of decisions he had made himself. More importantly, his hold over Audrey disappeared. The old paperwork no longer frightened her. It was simply evidence of a mistake she had already repaired. I looked at my daughter and remembered Luna. Years ago, my wife had held my hand and asked me to make sure Audrey always knew she had somewhere safe to come home to. I finally understood what that promise meant. It didn't mean preventing every hardship. It didn't mean fighting every battle. It meant making sure my daughter never forgot that she was strong enough to choose her own life. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Your mother would be proud of you. Audrey smiled through her tears. And that was the victory I cared about. I hadn't ruined Travis. I hadn't rescued my daughter by making her dependent on me. I had simply stood beside her until she could stand on her own. Sometimes a father doesn't need to fight his child's battle for them. Sometimes he only needs to stand beside them long enough for them to remember they are strong enough to fight it themselves. If this story touched you, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, your worst mistake may be part of your past, but it never has to become the prison of your future.